San Antonio, Texas, 2:47 in the afternoon. The Gunter Hotel rises above the city streets like a monument to prosperity in a time when prosperity feels like a distant memory. Inside room 414, the air is thick with cigarette smoke and the metallic smell of recording equipment that's been running too long. The temperature has climbed to 94 degrees outside, but in this converted hotel room, it feels closer to 100. Sweat runs down the back of Don Law's neck as he adjusts the single microphone for what feels like the 100th time today. Robert Johnson sits in a wooden chair facing the corner. His back is to everyone in the room. His guitar, a cheap Gibson that's seen better days, rests across his lap like a sleeping child. He hasn't looked at anyone since he arrived 3 hours ago. He won't look at the microphone. He won't look at Don Law or Art Satherley. He sits there, shoulders hunched, face turned to the wall, and when he plays, something happens that no one in that room can quite explain. The voice that comes out of Robert Johnson doesn't match the man. Don Law will think about this moment for the rest of his life. Years later, when he's an old man and Robert Johnson has become a legend, people will ask him what it was like to record the king of the Delta blues. And Law will always pause before answering, because the truth is strange, the truth is uncomfortable. The truth is that when Robert Johnson sang, it sounded like multiple people were in the room, but there was only one man sitting in that chair. Law signals to Satherley. The acetate disc is ready, the needle is positioned. In 1937, there are no second chances, no retakes, no editing. When the disc starts spinning, you have 3 minutes and 20 seconds to capture something real, or you've wasted expensive equipment and everyone's time. Johnson shifts in his chair. His fingers find the strings. He starts playing and the room changes. The first sound that emerges isn't quite human. It's higher than it should be, strained, desperate. It climbs up from somewhere deep in Johnson's chest and comes out sounding like a man being chased by something terrible. But underneath that high, keening voice, there's something else. A rumble, a moan. A second voice that seems to come from a different throat entirely. Law leans forward. His hand is frozen halfway to his face, cigarette forgotten. He's recorded hundreds of blues musicians. He knows every trick, every technique, every way a man can manipulate his voice to create an effect. This isn't that. This is something else. Johnson is playing what will later be called Hellhound on My Trail, though he doesn't call it anything. He just plays. His fingers move across the frets with a speed that seems impossible for someone who's supposed to be self-taught. The guitar isn't just accompanying his voice, it's answering it, arguing with it, creating a conversation between what sounds like 3 different people all trapped inside one body. When the song ends, Johnson doesn't move. He stays facing the wall. Law doesn't speak. Satherley is writing something in his notebook, but his hand is shaking slightly. They record 16 songs over 2 days. In every single one, that strange multiplicity of voices appears. Sometimes it's subtle, just a hint of someone else speaking through Johnson's throat. Other times, it's so pronounced that Law finds himself looking around the room, convinced that someone else has entered without him noticing. But the room is always empty, except for the 3 of them. And Johnson is always alone in that chair, face to the wall, playing like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. The question that will haunt musicologists for decades begins here, in this converted hotel room in San Antonio. The question that will spawn 1,000 theories and arguments and academic papers. The question that some people will die without answering. Whose voice is on Robert Johnson's recordings? 6 months after the San Antonio sessions, Don Law receives a telegram. Robert Johnson is dead, poisoned by a jealous husband in a juke joint in Three Forks, Mississippi. He was 27 years old. Law reads the telegram 3 times, sets it down, and walks to the window. He thinks about those recording sessions. He thinks about the way Johnson never looked at anyone. He thinks about the voice. And he realizes that whatever the world is about to hear, whatever those acetate discs contain, Robert Johnson took the real answer with him to the grave. The recordings sit in storage for months. Art Satherley isn't sure what to do with them. They're good, technically perfect, but there's something unsettling about them, something that makes people uncomfortable. The voice is too raw, too strange, too much like listening to something you're not supposed to hear, like someone crying in a room they thought was empty. Like a prayer spoken in the wrong language. But in 1938, the recordings are finally released. A few copies make it to record stores in the South. Blues enthusiasts buy them. Some love them immediately. Others find them disturbing and return them. The records don't sell well. Robert Johnson dies in relative obscurity, just another Delta blues musician who recorded a few songs and disappeared. For 2 decades, the recordings gather dust. Then something changes. 1961, New York City. A coffee shop in Greenwich Village called the Gaslight. Bob Dylan is 20 years old and sitting in the back corner with a borrowed record player and a copy of King of the Delta Blues Singers, a compilation album that includes Robert Johnson's recordings. Dylan has been playing folk music for 2 years. He's good, people say. He has potential. But there's something missing. Something he can't quite name. He drops the needle on the record. The first thing he hears is that voice, that impossible, multiplicitous voice that sounds like it's coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Dylan leans closer to the speaker. His cigarette burns down to ash in his hand, forgotten. He plays the record 17 times in a row. The coffee shop owner asks him to play something else. Dylan doesn't respond. He's hearing something in Johnson's voice that he's never heard in any music before. It's not just the pain, though there's plenty of that. It's not just the technical skill, though Johnson's guitar playing is extraordinary. It's something else. Something underneath the surface, like Johnson is channeling something that doesn't quite belong in this world. When Dylan finally speaks, his voice is hoarse. How did he do that? How did he make it sound like there's more than one person singing? The coffee shop owner shrugs. Some people say he sold his soul to the devil. Dylan looks at him like he said something profound, instead of repeating a tired legend. But maybe in this moment, it doesn't sound so tired. Maybe, with that voice still echoing in his ears, the devil seems like a reasonable explanation. Dylan isn't alone. All across America, young musicians are discovering Robert Johnson. They're hearing that voice and having the same reaction. The same confusion, the same sense that they're listening to something that shouldn't exist. Eric Clapton will later say that when he first heard Johnson's recordings, he thought multiple people were singing. Keith Richards will describe the experience as terrifying. Bonnie Raitt will talk about the way Johnson's voice seems to split into harmonies that shouldn't be possible from a single throat. But it's not just rock musicians. Musicologists start studying the recordings. They use equipment that didn't exist in 1937. They slow down the playback, isolate different frequencies, analyze every warble and moan. What they find doesn't make sense. Dr. Samuel Charters, an ethnomusicologist at Tulane University, spends 6 months studying Johnson's vocal techniques. In his 1973 book, he includes a chapter titled The Polyphonic Mystery. He writes, carefully and academically, that Johnson's voice exhibits characteristics that seem to suggest multiple sound sources. But he stops short of saying what everyone is thinking. It sounds like 2 people singing at once, sometimes 3. Dr. Charters interviews blues musicians who knew Johnson. He travels to Mississippi, to the juke joints and plantations where Johnson played. He talks to old men who remember the young guitarist with the strange voice. He could make his voice do things, one man tells him. His name is Willie Brown, and he played with Johnson in the early 30s. I seen a lot of blues singers. Some of them could sing high, some could sing low. Robert could sing both at the same time. Dr. Charters asks how that's possible. Willie Brown looks at him for a long time. Then he says something that Dr. Charters doesn't include in his book, but writes in his personal notes. Robert didn't learn to sing from no man. Whatever taught him, it wasn't human. The legend grows. Robert Johnson, the man who sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads. Robert Johnson, who could play guitar like no one before or since. Robert Johnson, who died young and left behind recordings that sound like they were made by someone who wasn't entirely of this world. But here's what the legend doesn't tell you. Here's what gets lost in the mythology and the romance and the endless analysis. Before Robert Johnson became Robert Johnson, he was just Robert. Just a kid in Mississippi trying to learn guitar and failing miserably. The other musicians laughed at him. They told him he should stick to the harmonica. His wife died in childbirth when he was 18, and people said it was God's judgment for trying to play the devil's music. Robert disappeared after that. He vanished for months, maybe a year. The exact timeline is unclear. No one knows where he went or what he did. When he came back, he could play guitar like a man possessed, and his voice had changed. It didn't sound like one voice anymore. It sounded like he'd brought something back with him from wherever he'd been. The Crossroads story becomes legend. Robert Johnson selling his soul to a man in black at the intersection of Highway 61 and Highway 49 in Clarksdale, Mississippi. The devil tuning his guitar, teaching him secrets that no human should know, putting something inside him that would make him famous and kill him young. But legends are simplifications. They take something complex and strange and reduce it to a story that makes sense. The truth is always messier. The truth is always harder to understand. 1998. The Library of Congress, Washington, D.C. A team of audio engineers led by Michael Graves is undertaking a restoration project. They're cleaning up old blues recordings, removing surface noise, improving the sound quality for a new release. When they get to Robert Johnson's recordings, something unexpected happens. The digital analysis software keeps flagging errors. It keeps insisting that there are multiple audio tracks, even though the recordings were made on single-track equipment. It keeps identifying separate voice sources, even though everyone knows Robert Johnson recorded alone. Graves runs the analysis 3 times. The results are consistent. According to the software, there are at least 2 distinct vocal sources on every Robert Johnson recording, sometimes 3. The frequencies don't match. The timbres are different. It's not echoes. It's not harmonics. It's not a quirk of the old recording equipment. It sounds, according to the mathematical analysis, like Robert Johnson was singing duets with himself. Graves writes a paper about his findings. It's published in a technical journal that most people never read. But among audio engineers and musicologists, it causes a quiet sensation. Because if the analysis is correct, if there really are multiple voice sources on those recordings, then 2 possibilities exist. Either Robert Johnson had one of the most extraordinary and unique vocal abilities in the history of recorded music, a technique so advanced that it still can't be fully explained or replicated, or something else was in that room with him. The comfortable explanation is the first one. Musicians develop strange techniques. They train their voices to do impossible things. Maybe Robert Johnson figured out how to manipulate his vocal cords in a way that created the illusion of multiple voices. Maybe he was a savant, a genius who stumbled onto something that even trained singers couldn't achieve. But that explanation doesn't account for what Don Law said, what he wrote in his private journals, which his family donated to the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2003. Law was an experienced recording engineer. He'd worked with hundreds of musicians. He knew every trick, every technique. And in his journal, on the page dated August 24, 1937, he wrote something that his family almost didn't allow to be published. Recorded Robert Johnson today. Strange session. The man won't look at anyone, plays facing the wall. But the voice, God help me, the voice. It sounds like there's someone else in the room. I keep looking around, but we're alone. Just me, Art, and Johnson. So where is the other voice coming from? Law crosses out the last sentence. Above it he writes, must be a trick of the acoustics. But the original words are still visible beneath the crossout, still readable, still asking a question that Law couldn't answer. Johnny Shines, a blues musician who traveled and played with Robert Johnson in the mid-30s, gives an interview in 1982. He's an old man by then, his own career long finished. The interviewer asks him about Johnson's voice, about the strange quality that everyone talks about. Shines is quiet for a long time, then he says, Robert could do things with his voice that weren't natural. I don't mean he was a good singer. I mean it wasn't natural. When he sang, sometimes I'd swear there was someone standing behind him, singing along, but there never was. It was just Robert, just him and whatever he carried inside. The interviewer asks what Shines means by whatever he carried inside. Shines doesn't answer. He changes the subject. The interview ends shortly after. But later, when the tape recorder is off, Shines says something that the interviewer remembers and writes down. He says, Robert made a deal. Everyone knows that. But the deal wasn't what people think. He didn't sell his soul. He shared it. He let something in, and it never left. This is speculation, of course. This is the kind of story that grows around mysterious artists, especially ones who die young. But the recordings remain. The voice remains. And the voice continues to confound anyone who listens carefully. In 2008, a vocal coach named Dr. Miranda Stevens at the Berklee College of Music conducts an experiment. She plays Robert Johnson's recordings for 20 of her advanced students. She doesn't tell them anything about the artist or the songs. She just asks them to analyze the vocal technique. 19 out of 20 students report hearing multiple singers. When told it's one person, they don't believe it. Several insist she's lying. One student, a young woman from New Orleans with 10 years of classical training, leaves the room visibly upset. That's not one person, she says. That can't be one person. Something's wrong with those recordings. Dr. Stevens asks what she means. I mean, something's wrong, the student repeats. Like something's in there that shouldn't be. Like something got recorded that wasn't supposed to be recorded. She refuses to listen to Robert Johnson's music again. The devil theory persists because it's the only explanation that feels adequate. Because saying Robert Johnson had an unusual vocal technique doesn't capture the strangeness of what's on those recordings. It doesn't explain why people feel uncomfortable listening to them, why they sound, even today, even with modern remastering, like they're coming from somewhere else. The Crossroads story says Robert Johnson met the devil at midnight. The devil took his guitar, tuned it, played a song, and handed it back. From that moment on, Johnson could play anything. But the price was his soul, which the devil would collect in exactly 1 year. But there's another version of the story, a less famous version. In this version, the devil doesn't take Johnson's soul. Instead, he puts something inside Johnson, a second voice, a shadow voice, something that will sing through him for the rest of his short life. You want to play the blues? The devil says, real blues? The kind that makes people feel what you feel? Then you need to carry the weight. You need to have something inside you that knows what it's like to be damned. And Johnson, desperate and grieving and willing to do anything to escape the ordinary life that's crushing him, says yes. The story is folklore, of course. It's mythology. But mythology exists because it tries to explain things that fact cannot. And the fact is this. Robert Johnson's voice sounds like it carries something that shouldn't be there. 3 years after Robert Johnson's death, a bluesman named Robert Lockwood Jr. gives an interview to a local Mississippi newspaper. Lockwood was Johnson's stepson, learned guitar from him, played with him. The interview is brief, mostly forgotten. But in the middle, Lockwood says something strange. Robert's voice changed after he came back from wherever he went. Before, he sounded normal. After, he sounded like two people talking at once. He told me once, late at night when we were drinking, that he could hear someone else singing when he sang, like there was another person in his throat. He said it scared him at first. Then he got used to it. The interviewer asks if Johnson said who the other voice belonged to. Lockwood doesn't answer directly. He says, Robert died trying to run from something. Everyone says it was a jealous husband who poisoned him, and maybe that's true. but I always wondered if he was running from something else. Something that had been with him for a long time. Something he let in that he couldn't get out. The interview ends there. Lockwood never speaks publicly about Robert Johnson again. The recordings continue to circulate. They influence everyone who hears them. The Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Fleetwood Mac, Cream. They all cover Johnson's songs. They all try to capture that voice. None of them succeed, because the voice isn't just about technique or emotion. It's about whatever Robert Johnson carried with him into that hotel room in San Antonio. In 2019, a sound engineer named Thomas Chen uses artificial intelligence to analyze Robert Johnson's vocal patterns. He creates a computer model that attempts to isolate and identify every sound source in the recordings. The results are published in a technical journal that most people never read. According to Chen's analysis, there are definitive indications of at least 2 separate vocal sources on every Robert Johnson recording. The AI identifies them as Voice A and Voice B. Voice A matches what would be expected from a male singer in his mid-20s. Voice B is harder to classify. It exhibits characteristics that don't match typical human vocal patterns. The frequency ranges are too wide. The tonal shifts are too sudden. The harmonics are irregular. Chen includes a note at the end of his paper. He writes, "Further analysis is needed to determine if Voice B is a result of recording artifacts, unusual vocal techniques, or some other factor currently not understood." Some other factor currently not understood. That's the academic way of saying we have no idea what we're hearing. The legacy of Robert Johnson isn't just his songs or his guitar playing. It's that voice, that impossible voice that sounds like it's coming from multiple sources. That voice that people still argue about, still study, still try to explain. That voice that made Robert Johnson into a legend because it sounded like he was singing from somewhere beyond normal human experience. Before he died, in the weeks leading up to his poisoning, people who saw Johnson said he was scared. He kept looking over his shoulder. He told people that something was following him. He said he could feel it getting closer. Some people thought he was paranoid. Others thought he was drunk. But Robert Lockwood Jr., who knew him best, thought it was something else. He was trying to get away from what he'd let in, Lockwood said years later, in a private conversation that was recorded without his knowledge and later transcribed. He thought if he kept moving, it couldn't catch him. But you can't run from something that's inside you. You can't escape something you invited in. August 16, 1938, Three Forks, Mississippi, a juke joint called Three Forks Store. Robert Johnson takes the stage around midnight. He's been drinking, people say later. He's been nervous. He plays 3 songs. His voice sounds different tonight, more strained, like he's fighting with something. Between sets, a woman hands him a bottle of whiskey. He drinks from it without looking at who gave it to him. The poison is already in his system. His body is already shutting down. He has 3 days left to live. During those 3 days, while he's dying slowly in a room above a plantation store, he talks to people. He says strange things. He says he can hear someone singing. He says the voice in his throat isn't his anymore. He says something is using him up from the inside. On the 3rd day, he dies. The official cause is listed as poisoning. The unofficial cause, whispered in juke joints and churches across Mississippi, is that Robert Johnson finally paid the price for whatever deal he made. But here's what almost no one knows. Here's what doesn't make it into the legend. On the night before he died, Robert Johnson asked for a guitar. The plantation owner's son, who was sitting with him, brought him a beat-up acoustic. Johnson could barely hold it. His hands were shaking. His breathing was labored. But he played one last song. The son, whose name was David Edwards, described it years later in a letter to a blues historian. He wrote, "Robert played something I never heard before. It wasn't any song I knew. It was just him and the guitar, no words. But I swear on my life I could hear someone singing. There was no one else in the room, just me and Robert." But I heard a voice, clear as day, singing something that sounded like a funeral song. Robert heard it too. I could tell by the look on his face. He was listening to it. When he stopped playing, the voice stopped. He looked at me and said, "It's finally leaving." Then he closed his eyes. He died 6 hours later. Edwards never told this story publicly. He only wrote it down once in that letter, and he asked that it not be shared until after his death. The letter was found in 1999 among his possessions. It's currently held in the archives at the University of Mississippi. Most people don't believe the letter is real. They think it's a fabrication, a ghost story invented to add mystery to an already mysterious death. But the handwriting has been authenticated. The dates match. David Edwards was in that room, and he had no reason to lie in a private letter that he never intended anyone to see. The recordings remain. That's what's concrete. That's what's real. 16 songs recorded over 2 days in San Antonio, Texas in 1937. A voice that sounds like multiple voices. A guitar that sounds like multiple guitars. A man who played like he was channeling something from another world. Listen to the recordings yourself, not as background music, not casually. Put on headphones, close your eyes. Listen to that voice. Really listen to it. Pay attention to the moments between the words, the spaces where the voice shifts and changes, the sections where it sounds like someone else takes over, the harmonies that shouldn't be possible from a single throat. And then ask yourself the question that musicologists have been asking for decades. Whose voice is that? Is it Robert Johnson, a genius who developed vocal techniques so advanced they still can't be replicated? Is it a trick of the recording equipment, an artifact of 1937 technology that creates the illusion of multiple voices? Is it something explainable by science and training and technique? Or is it something else? Is it possible that Robert Johnson, desperate and grieving and willing to do anything to escape his ordinary life, really did make a deal? Not with the devil exactly, but with something. Something that gave him the ability to play guitar like a master and sing with a voice that wasn't entirely his own. Something that used him as a vessel for 3 years and left him when it was finished. The comfortable answer is no. The rational answer is that Robert Johnson was an extraordinarily talented musician who developed unique techniques that sound strange to our ears. The reasonable answer is that we're looking for mystery where there's only skill. But late at night, when you're alone and you put on one of those recordings, when you hear that voice splitting into harmonies that shouldn't exist, when you hear what sounds like someone else singing through Robert Johnson's throat, the comfortable answer doesn't quite satisfy. Because the voice that comes out of those recordings still doesn't match the man. It still sounds like multiple people in a room where there was only one. It still sounds like something that shouldn't be possible. Robert Johnson died in 1938, but his voice, or whatever was sharing that voice, lives on in those recordings. It lives on in every musician who's been influenced by him. It lives on in the endless debates and studies and theories. And it lives on in the question that will never be fully answered. Whose voice is on Robert Johnson's recordings? The answer, if there is one, died with him in a small room in Mississippi, while something he'd carried inside him for 3 years finally let him go. The answer, if there is one, is buried in a grave that no one can even definitively locate, because Robert Johnson was buried in an unmarked plot, and the exact location has been lost to time. What remains are the recordings, the voice, the mystery, and the uncomfortable feeling when you listen closely enough that you're hearing something you're not supposed to hear. Something that was captured on those acetate discs in 1937 and can never be erased. Something that Robert Johnson carried with him for 3 years and finally released in his last moments. Some people say music is humanity's way of touching the divine. Others say it's our way of channeling the darkness. Robert Johnson's recordings suggest it might be both. They suggest that the line between genius and possession is thinner than we'd like to believe. They suggest that some voices don't belong entirely to the person singing them. The recordings are still available today. You can stream them right now. You can hear that voice for yourself. You can make your own decision about what you're hearing, about whether it's one voice or many, about whether Robert Johnson was alone in that hotel room, or whether something was there with him, singing through him, using him as a conduit for something that wanted to be heard. Before you go, if you found this story as fascinating as I did, if it made you think about music differently, if it sent a chill down your spine when you considered what might have been in that room with Robert Johnson, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. There are more stories like this, more mysteries in music history that don't have easy answers. And I'll be here, telling them to you, trying to understand what we're really hearing when we listen to the voices that changed the world. Robert Johnson's voice, whatever it was, changed everything. It influenced every blues musician who came after. It shaped rock and roll. It created a template for what raw, authentic, soul-crushing music could sound like. But it also left a question that we're still trying to answer. A question that gets deeper the more you study those recordings. A question that maybe doesn't have an answer that we'd feel comfortable hearing. The voice that wasn't Robert Johnson's, but was in his recordings, remains one of music's greatest mysteries. And maybe that's how it should be. Maybe some mysteries are meant to stay mysterious. Maybe some voices are meant to remain unexplained. Or maybe, just maybe, the explanation is too strange for us to accept. Maybe the truth about Robert Johnson's voice would force us to reconsider everything we think we know about music, about talent, about the price we pay for greatness. The recordings are there, the voice is there, the mystery is there. The rest is up to you to decide.